I found out on a Tuesday, which felt wrong. Discoveries like this should arrive on dramatic evenings, in storms, with some atmospheric acknowledgement of what they mean. Instead, it was a Tuesday in February, 41 degrees and drizzling, and I was sitting at the kitchen table grading papers on the French Revolution when I opened Sandra's laptop to print a document and found a thread of emails that rewrote 8 years of my life in about 12 minutes. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 44 years old. I teach AP History at Westridge High School in Columbus, Ohio, and I have spent the better part of a decade trying to be enough for a family that had decided before I walked through the door that I wasn't. I didn't know that second part until the Tuesday in February. Or rather, I knew it in the way you know things you've decided not to examine. I felt it in every holiday dinner at Gerald and Evelyn Pruitt's house in Upper Arlington. I felt it in the particular tone Evelyn used when she asked about my salary, the way Gerald shook my hand like he was completing a transaction he hadn't agreed to. I felt it in Sandra's silences after those dinners, the way she'd drive home looking at the road with an expression I could never quite read. I told myself it was normal in-law friction. I told myself I was oversensitive. I told myself that Sandra had chosen me, that whatever her parents thought, the choosing was hers, and it meant something. The email thread suggested otherwise. It had started, as far as I could reconstruct, 3 months into our marriage. Sandra's mother had written first, "I know you love him, sweetheart, but I want you to be honest with yourself about whether this is the life you imagined." Sandra had replied 4 days later, and her reply was not what a woman who had chosen her husband should write. It was not a defense. It was not a declaration. It was a careful, considered agreement, a list of things she wished were different, written in the measured tone of someone who had been waiting for permission to say them out loud. 8 years of emails. Hundreds of them. A running parallel conversation about my inadequacies, my limitations, my failure to be the man Evelyn and Gerald had wanted for their daughter. And Sandra, in every one of them, had been not a reluctant participant but an active one, contributing, elaborating, building the case. I closed the laptop, sat for a moment with the French Revolution papers in front of me. Somewhere upstairs, Noah and Grace were asleep, unaware that their father had just discovered the infrastructure beneath everything. Then I opened it again, because I needed to know how far it went. It went further than I was ready for. Columbus in early autumn has a quality of light I've always liked, low and golden, slanting through the maples on our street in a way that makes ordinary things look considered, like someone arranged them for a photograph. We lived on Alderton Road in a house Sandra had designed the interior of herself, not ostentatiously, but with the quiet, assured taste of someone who understood proportion and color and the specific weight of objects in space. She was good at her work. I want to say that clearly, because the story I'm about to tell is not a story about a mediocre person. Sandra was talented, perceptive, and genuinely gifted at creating environments where people felt comfortable. The irony of that is not lost on me. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday party 8 years before. Sandra was 33, recently finished with a relationship her parents had approved of, a financial advisor named Brett, who had the kind of jaw and the kind of portfolio that made Evelyn Pruitt's eyes go soft with approval. The relationship had ended because Brett, it turned out, was the kind of man who had the portfolio and the jaw and very little else, and Sandra, whatever her faults, was not someone who could sustain a marriage on aesthetics alone. I was 36, teaching history at Westridge, driving a 7-year-old Honda Civic, and wearing a jacket that Tom Briggs, my best friend since graduate school, later told me had been a genuine act of optimism on my part. Sandra had laughed at something I said about the French monarchy's talent for catastrophic self-deception, and her laugh was real and immediate and didn't carry any of the social calculus that most laughs at parties do. I fell in love with that laugh before the evening was over. Gerald and Evelyn received the news of our relationship with the specific warmth of people who have been trained in courtesy and are deploying it under duress. Gerald asked me, at our first dinner, what my plans were for advancement in the school district. The question of a man who has assessed a situation and found it wanting and is looking for evidence that he is wrong. I told him about the AP program, the curriculum work I'd been doing, the genuine satisfaction of the job. He nodded the way people nod when they're not being convinced. Evelyn was more subtle. She had the skill, common in certain mothers of daughters, of expressing concern in the language of care. "I just want to make sure Sandra will be comfortable," Marcus seems like a lovely person, but the income of a teacher. I know she loves him, but love doesn't pay for the life Sandra is used to. These were things she said to Sandra, not to me. I know this because Sandra told me some of them. The edited versions, the ones designed to be laughed off, to be filed under my mother means well. She presented them as evidence of her parents' limitations rather than her own doubts. I accepted this framing. It was easier than the alternative. The first sign I should have examined more carefully came at our wedding rehearsal dinner. Gerald gave a toast. A gracious one, skillfully constructed, full of warm things about Sandra and careful things about me. And somewhere in the middle of it, he said, Sandra has always known her own mind, and we trust her to make her own choices. It was said warmly, and it landed slightly wrong, the way a sentence lands when the verb carries more weight than the speaker intended. Trust her to make her own choices. Now we're delighted by her choice. Not Marcus is exactly the man we hoped for. A concession, dressed as a blessing. Tom caught it. He found me afterward at the bar and said, very quietly, did Gerald just essentially tell his daughter's wedding guests that he's reserving judgment? He's Gerald, I said. He reserves judgment on everything. Fair, Tom said, and handed me a drink. I should have held on to what Tom said. Instead, I filed it and moved forward, which was, I understand now, the characteristic move of a man who has built his identity around the effort of proving himself to people who have already made up their minds. The first year of marriage was good, genuinely good, not a managed version of good. Sandra was warm and engaged and present in the way she could be when she wasn't performing for her parents. We traveled. We built routines. We talked about design and history with the specific pleasure of two people who have found in each other an audience for their enthusiasms. The in-law friction was background noise, not signal. I turned down the volume on it because the foreground was good enough to drown it out. Noah arrived in our second year. Grace in our fourth. Sandra took maternity leave twice and returned to her design work with a focused energy that I admired. She built her client list steadily, earned her own reputation separate from the firm she'd started with, made a name on the Columbus interior design circuit that was entirely her own. I was proud of her. I told her so, regularly. What I did not do, what I see now as the slow accumulation of its own damage, was notice how rarely she told me the same thing. Not because she thought badly of me, or not only that, but because the voice in her head, the voice that evaluated her choices and her life and her husband, had been her mother's voice for 35 years, and Evelyn Pruitt had never been convinced. The shift was gradual and then, in retrospect, obvious, the way most shifts are. A change in barometric pressure that you notice only when you realize you've been breathing differently for weeks. It started, I think, in the 5th year of our marriage. Noah was 3, Grace was 1, and Sandra had taken on a major commission, a full residential redesign for a family in New Dublin, serious money, the kind of project that consolidates a reputation. She was working long hours, and I was covering mornings and drop-offs and the specific domestic labor of 2 small children, which I did without resentment, but which, I noticed, was invisible to Evelyn and Gerald in a particular way. When they visited that fall, Evelyn watched me change Grace's diaper and make Noah's lunch and manage both children through a grocery run, and she said, with the tone of someone making an observation rather than a compliment, Sandra's lucky to have someone so helpful around the house. Helpful, not capable, not a partner. Helpful, the word you use for someone performing a support function. I laughed it off. I was good at laughing things off. Sandra had started calling her mother more often. Not dramatically more, but the calls had a different quality. Longer, more private, the kind where she'd step into the back room and close the door rather than taking them on the couch with me in earshot. I noticed this the way I noticed the thermostat being set 2 degrees lower than I preferred. A small discomfort, below the threshold of confrontation. The money conversation arrived in spring of that year, and it was the first time I saw clearly that the Pruitt voice had migrated inside Sandra's head. We were reviewing our finances, a quarterly thing we did together, a practice I'd suggested and Sandra had agreed to. The numbers were fine. Not extravagant, but solid. My salary, Sandra's growing freelance income, a mortgage we were ahead on, modest savings. I had always thought we were on the same page about money, not obsessed with it, not anxious, managing sensibly. Sandra looked at the spreadsheet for a while without speaking. Then she said, "My mother thinks we should be further along by now." Further along how? Investment portfolio. Retirement. She and Dad had much more secured at our age. Your parents had different careers, I said. Your father was in commercial real estate during a 20-year expansion. The comparison isn't. I know the comparison isn't exact. She said it without heat, but with a finality that closed the conversation. I'm just saying what she said. I'm just saying what she said. I turned that sentence over for a long time after she left the room. She hadn't said I think. She hadn't said I feel. She had relayed her mother's judgment as if it were weather, an external condition arrived from outside, not something she'd generated herself. But she had opened the door to it. And in opening the door, she'd let the draft in. Tom noticed the change at a dinner that spring. Tom and his wife Cecilia came over for dinner. The four of us, the kind of easy social evening that long friendship makes comfortable. Afterward, washing up in the kitchen, Tom said quietly, "Is Sandra okay?" "What do you mean?" "She seems, I don't know, like she's calculating something. She's got a big project on." "Not that kind of calculating." He dried a glass. "More like she's measuring the room." "Measuring you?" I looked at him. "Probably nothing," he said. "Cecilia thinks I read into things." "You do read into things," I said. "I'm not wrong very often, though," he said, and handed me the glass. The second thing I noticed was the college conversations. Sandra had started mentioning, with increasing frequency, the trajectories of her colleagues and peers, designers who had moved into real estate development, who had built firms, who had made significant money in ways that exceeded client work. These conversations weren't arguments. They weren't criticisms. They were observations, delivered neutrally, that contained inside them a comparison she never stated directly. The comparison was always the same, and the thing being compared to was always me. I am a high school history teacher. I am not ashamed of this. I believe in the work. I'm good at it. My students find me, and sometimes years later reach out to say that something I said mattered. The job has a dignity that cannot be measured in Gerald Pruitt's preferred metrics. But dignity doesn't calculate compound interest. And in the 5th year of our marriage, Sandra had begun to see our life through a lens I recognized but couldn't quite name. Until the Tuesday in February when I found the emails and the lens had a label. The label was her mother's handwriting. I want to be precise about what I found, because the emails were not simple. They were not a wife venting to her mother about a difficult husband in the way that people sometimes need to vent. They were a sustained, 8-year dialogue in which Sandra had gradually, methodically, aligned herself with her parents' original assessment of me, not in anger, not in crisis, but in the slow, patient way of someone finally admitting a thing she'd been half-thinking for years. The earliest ones, from the first year, were defensive. Sandra pushing back against Evelyn's concerns, explaining my qualities, translating my value into language her mother might accept. Reading them was strange, like finding evidence of a version of Sandra that had existed and then eroded. She had loved me clearly in those early emails. She had argued for me with specific warmth. The shift came around year 3, not all at once. Not a single email where everything changed, but a gradual softening of the defense, a growing willingness to concede points. You might be right that we should have more saved by now. I do wish he had more ambition in the traditional sense. I know what you mean about the long-term picture. By year 5, the year of the money conversation, the year Tom said Sandra seemed like she was measuring things, the emails had become something else entirely. Not venting. Architecture. Sandra and Evelyn building, together, a detailed and structured case for the inadequacy of my life choices, my earning potential, my professional ceiling, my inability to provide the security that Evelyn defined as the baseline requirement for a successful marriage. There was a thread from the previous November, 3 months before I found it, that I read 4 times. Sandra had written, "I love him, Mom. I do. But I look at what Cecilia and Tom have and I think, is this enough? Is this what I wanted?" And Evelyn had replied the next morning, "That's the question only you can answer, sweetheart. But I notice you're asking it. I notice you're asking it." I closed the laptop and sat with that sentence for a long time. The other thing I found, the thing I hadn't gone looking for and was not prepared for, was a forwarded email from Gerald. Gerald Pruitt was not a man who wrote personal emails. He conducted his family communications through Evelyn, who served as both sender and receiver of all emotional information in the household. That he had written directly to Sandra in March of the previous year, and that Sandra had saved the email in the same folder, told me something about the weight he'd assigned to it. Gerald had written 6 paragraphs. They were precise and detailed and delivered with the tone of a man who had been waiting a long time to say something he'd been too careful to say before. The substance was this: that he had researched my pension, my likely salary trajectory, the retirement projections of a public school teacher in Ohio, that he had run the numbers, that in his professional assessment, he had been in commercial real estate for 30 years. He knew numbers. My lifetime earnings would fall significantly short of what Sandra's lifestyle and their grandchildren's prospects required. That he was not telling her what to do. That he was giving her information. He had attached a spreadsheet. My father-in-law had built a financial case for leaving me and sent it to my wife in a spreadsheet. Sandra had replied, "Thank you, Dad. I've been thinking about the same things." It helps to see it laid out. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after reading that. The French Revolution papers were still on the table. Marie Antoinette, I had written in the margin of one, did not invent the policies that destroyed the monarchy. She simply embodied them, making visible what had been true for years. The student had received a B+. I thought about that margin note for a while. Then I thought about Tom. About what Tom had said in the kitchen. I'm not wrong very often. About the way Tom had watched Sandra at that dinner, with the quiet attention of a man who understood something he wasn't sure whether to say. I called Tom the next morning from my car in the school parking lot, 10 minutes before first period. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay. Did Sandra ever say anything to you, or to Cecilia, about her parents and our marriage?" A pause. The specific pause of a man deciding how honest to be. "Cecilia," he said carefully, "mentioned something Sandra said to her in November. At that birthday thing." "What did she say?" "Marcus." "Tom." Another pause. "She told Cecilia she'd been having a hard time knowing whether she'd made the right choice." Those words. The right choice. I looked at the school building through the windshield. She said her parents had been. She used the phrase opening her eyes. Her parents had been opening her eyes to things she'd been unwilling to see. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Cecilia asked me not to," he said. "Because she thought Sandra was going through something and would come out the other side. Because I didn't have," he stopped. "Because I didn't have a spreadsheet." "I have a spreadsheet now," I said. Silence. "Jesus," Tom said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "I went and taught 3 periods of AP history. I covered the fall of the Romanovs, which in retrospect was not the day's most emotionally neutral material. Then I drove home, made dinner for Noah and Grace, read them their stories, put them to bed, and waited for Sandra. She came home at 7:30 from a client meeting. She was in a good mood. The new Dublin project had a follow-up commission, a referral from the original clients, the kind of professional momentum she'd been building toward. She talked about it over the reheated pasta I'd left for her, animated and detailed and completely present. I listened. I asked questions. I was, for that evening, exactly the patient and supportive person her mother's emails had described as insufficient. Then I told her what I'd found. I told her the way you tell someone you know the truth, not with evidence laid out on the table, not with a speech prepared. I simply said, "I opened your laptop to print something on Tuesday. I found the email folder." Sandra set down her fork. "Which folder?" she said. Not a question. "The one labeled Project Notes, which contains 8 years of emails to your mother about whether your husband is good enough." The silence that followed had a particular texture, not the silence of someone caught off guard, but the silence of someone who has been waiting for a conversation to arrive and is now deciding how to enter it. "And your father's spreadsheet," I added. "That was a nice touch. Very thorough." "Marcus, I'm genuinely curious." I kept my voice even, almost pleasant. The specific pleasantness of someone who has processed enough of the pain to arrive at the cold clarity on the other side. Did he use a template, or did he build it from scratch? Because the pension projection section was detailed, he must have done some research. "You're being sarcastic." "I'm being impressed, Sandra. 30 years in commercial real estate, and he still finds time to model his son-in-law's lifetime earnings ceiling. That's commitment to the bit." "Stop. I'm curious about the methodology, actually." I leaned back in my chair. "Did you contribute data, or was it entirely his analysis? Because you wrote that you'd been thinking about the same things. So I want to know, when you were thinking about the same things, were you running your own numbers, or were you working from his spreadsheet?" "This isn't." Here's what I keep coming back to. I said it quietly, all the sarcasm gone. Just the sentence, plain and direct. Year one, you defended me. I found those emails too. You told your mother that I was the man you wanted and that she was wrong about what mattered. You were articulate about it. You meant it. I paused. What changed? Sandra looked at the table. When she raised her head, her expression had shifted, not to guilt, not to the breakdown I might have expected, to something harder, more prepared. What changed, she said, is that I grew up. I stopped being a newlywed who was too in love to think clearly, and I started being a mother of two children who needed to think about their future. Their future. Yes, our children's future. The schools they'll go to, the opportunities they'll have, the financial foundation that determines all of that. Sandra. I said her name with a flatness that stopped her. That's your mother's voice. I've been reading her emails for 2 days. I recognize the syntax. It's also my voice. Is it? Because in year one, your voice said something different. In year one, I was 33 and in love, and I hadn't thought carefully enough about whether a high school teacher was an acceptable long-term investment. She flinched. Not at the words, at the accuracy of them. You never thought it was about that. I thought it was about us, I said. I thought the marriage was about us. I didn't know there was a parallel evaluation happening in your mother's inbox. My mother loves me. She worries about me. That's what mothers do. Your mother built a case file. I kept my voice completely level. Over 8 years. With your active participation. A detailed, documented case for my inadequacy. And you contributed to it. You elaborated on it. You added evidence. I paused. That's not your mother worrying about you. That's you, Sandra. That's you deciding that the man you married wasn't the man you wanted and not having the courage to say so to his face. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you went through my private emails. Your father sent your husband's retirement projection to your inbox. The privacy ship has sailed. You violated. Don't. I said it once, quietly. Don't redirect this to my methods. That's not the conversation. She pressed her lips together. Something was moving behind her eyes. The calculation Tom had identified, the measuring. She was deciding what version of this to give me. Tell me something, I said. The counseling story. Did you tell your parents we were in counseling? Or were the emails enough? She blinked. What counseling story? Never mind. I waved it off. Different question. Does Tom know? Does Cecilia? A pause. Cecilia knows I've been struggling. Struggling with what, specifically? With, she stopped. With knowing whether the life I have is the life I want. And the life you have is a history teacher with a pension projection your father disapproves of. The life I have is complicated. Then uncomplicated, I said. Tell me what you actually want. Not what your mother wants. Not the spreadsheet version. What you, Sandra Hale, want from this marriage. She looked at me for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. I could hear the heat cycling on in the walls. I want you to stop making me feel guilty for having standards, she said. I looked at her. The word landed with the specific weight of something that has traveled a long distance before arriving. Standards, I said. I was raised to expect certain things. That's not a character flaw. No, I said. But agreeing with your mother that your husband falls below them for 8 years in writing without ever once bringing those standards to me directly. That's something. I tried to bring things to you. When the money conversations, the career conversations, I raised these things. You relayed your mother's concerns to me and then closed the conversation when I responded. That's not the same as bringing something to me. I picked up my wine glass and set it down without drinking. I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it. Not manage it. Answer it. She waited. Do you want to be married to me? The silence before her answer was very long. Long enough that the answer was in the silence before she spoke. I don't know, she said. I honestly don't know. Because of the spreadsheet. Because of everything. Because I'm 41 and I'm asking questions I should have asked before I had 2 children and a mortgage and, she stopped. Because my parents were never wrong about you, Marcus. They were just saying it in a way I didn't want to hear. I absorbed that. Let it settle. Here's what I know, I said finally. You had 8 years to have this conversation with me. You chose to have it with your mother instead. Every time we could have sat across from each other and talked honestly about what was working and what wasn't, you took it to Evelyn. You let her build the case instead of building the conversation. I stood up from the table. That's not your parents' failure, Sandra. That's yours. She didn't respond immediately. I cleared the plates. The domesticity of it, clearing plates after the conversation that ended everything, felt exactly right, somehow. The ordinary continuation of ordinary things. What happens now? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. But I know what doesn't happen. You don't get to control the narrative with your parents. Whatever they hear next comes from the truth, not from a managed version of it. She looked up. They built their case on my inadequacy, I said. They should at least get to see what that case produced. The wife's confession came 3 days later. Sandra called me from her car. I was at school, between periods, and she said she needed to talk, and I said I'd be home at 4. She was there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface in a posture I recognized from the confrontation. The posture of someone who has made a decision and is sitting with its weight. She spoke for a long time without managing it. This was different from 3 days earlier. The calculation was gone, or most of it, replaced by something rawer and less organized. I need to tell you how this actually started, she said. Not the version where my parents pressured me. The real version. I sat down. All right. The first email to my mother, in year 1, wasn't a defense of you. I told you it was, but it wasn't. Or it wasn't only that. She stopped. It was a question. I wrote to her because I was scared. Not of you, of myself. Of whether I had made this choice because I wanted it, or because I was tired of the choices I'd been making before. She paused. Brett was everything my parents wanted, and he was completely empty. And I thought choosing you meant I had finally chosen for myself. But there was a part of me, from the beginning, that wasn't sure if I'd chosen for myself or just against my parents. That's different from what you said 3 days ago. I know. 3 days ago, you said your parents were never wrong about me. I was angry 3 days ago. She looked at her hands. I was scared. I said the thing that would hurt most because I wanted. She stopped. I don't know what I wanted. Control, probably. Keep going, I said. The emails escalated because my mother is very good at a specific thing. She asks questions that sound like concern and function like excavation. Every time I told her something positive about our life, she would find the crack in it. Not cruelly. She doesn't think she's being cruel. She thinks she's helping me see clearly. Sandra's voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. By year 3, I had stopped reporting the positive things. Not consciously. I'd had the experience enough times of my mother finding the flaw in it that I stopped offering them. And if you only ever send the cracks to someone, after a while the picture they have is only cracks. And the picture became your picture. Slowly. Yes. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. Your father's spreadsheet. I asked him to do it. I need you to know that. He didn't send it unsolicited. I called him last February and told him I was struggling to see the long-term picture and asked him to help me think about it. He gave me what I asked for. The room was very quiet. You asked him to build the financial case against our marriage. I asked him to help me think clearly. He gave me the version of clarity he knew how to give. She looked up. I'm not defending him. I'm not defending myself. I'm telling you the actual shape of it. I sat with this for a long time. The shape of it was different from what I'd thought. Not Sandra as a passive recipient of her parents' influence. Sandra as an active architect of her own doubt, using her parents as the construction crew. What were you going to do with it? I asked. The emails, the spreadsheet. If I hadn't found them, what was the plan? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know that I had a plan. I think I was building toward a decision without quite admitting I was building toward a decision. She paused. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. What about the first lie? I said, the first time you wrote to your mother and framed something about me in a way that wasn't true. Do you remember it? She thought. Year 2. You were offered the department chair position. You turned it down because you said you wanted to stay in the classroom, that the administrative work would take you away from teaching. She paused. I wrote to my mother that you'd turned down a promotion. I used that word. Promotion. Not department chair, promotion. And then I said you weren't ambitious. But you told me you agreed with the decision. I did agree. In the moment, I agreed. She looked at the table. But the version I sent my mother was the version where I was already uncertain. And once I'd sent that version, it was harder to go back to the other one. Because the other one would have meant admitting to your mother that you'd been wrong. Yes. I thought about that. The specific shape of a lie that is less about deception and more about the cost of honesty. The way you send one version to one audience, and then find yourself unable to reconcile it with the version you actually lived. The moment you try to stop, I said. Was there one? She thought for a long time. Last April, after the Noah's school conversation, when you went to 3 meetings and advocated for his reading program, and they implemented it. I wrote to my mother about it, and she wrote back that that was the kind of thing that fathers do, and it wasn't about professional quality. Sandra's voice shifted slightly, and I read that, and I thought, my mother just dismissed something genuinely good about my husband because it doesn't fit her spreadsheet. And I was angry at her for the first time in years. But you didn't stop. I didn't stop. I wrote back and changed the subject. Because stopping would have meant looking at 7 years of emails and understanding what I'd been building, and I wasn't ready. The shame, I said. What's the physical version of it? She looked at me. The question had surprised her. Last Christmas, she said, your mother was here. She was playing with Grace on the floor. You came in from somewhere, and Grace looked up at you and said, Daddy, in that voice she has. That specific voice that only happens when she's really glad you're there. And your mother was watching you pick Grace up, and I was watching from the kitchen doorway. And I thought, I have been writing to my mother about whether this man is enough. And his daughter looks at him like that. She stopped. That's the physical version. Something in my chest. I didn't say anything for a moment. I couldn't look at Grace's drawings on the fridge for a week afterward, Sandra said quietly. She'd made one of all 4 of us, with a sun in the corner. And I couldn't look at it. The kitchen was very still. What do you want? I asked. The real answer. Not the spreadsheet version. She looked at me for a long time. I want to find out if there's still a version of us that isn't built on my parents' architecture. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if I've left enough of it intact. She paused. I know I don't deserve to ask for that. No, I said. You don't. I know. We sat in the kitchen until the light failed outside. Neither of us moved to turn on the lamp. The darkness came gradually, the way it comes in February. Not a switch, but a slow erasure of detail, until we were 2 shapes at a table in a kitchen we had built together and might not keep. Now I need to tell you about Tom. Because the story I've been telling you has a shape, and I thought I knew the shape, and then Tom called me on a Sunday in March and added a room I hadn't known was there. We had been separated for 3 weeks. Sandra had moved to her parents' house in Upper Arlington. The supreme irony of that not requiring elaboration. Noah and Grace were with her, with the arrangement that I had them every Wednesday and alternating weekends. I was teaching, grading papers, existing in the particular suspension of a man who has not yet decided the full shape of his next life. Tom called at 9 in the morning. He said, I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. Tell me. I said. Sandra came to me, he said. Last October, before you found the emails. She came to me and told me she was thinking about leaving you, and she asked me what I thought. I was quiet. I told her she was making a mistake, Tom said. I told her that what her parents had built in her head wasn't real, and that you were a good man and a good father, and that she was confusing her mother's voice for her own. He paused. She listened. She seemed like she heard me. And then she said one thing that I've been sitting with ever since. What did she say? She said, Tom, what if my mother was right and I've been defending the wrong choice for 8 years because I couldn't admit I made it? I sat with that. And what did you say? I said that even if she'd had doubts from the beginning, 8 years of building something real with a person doesn't become nothing because of a spreadsheet. He paused. She cried. She said she needed to think. I thought she was going to come to you. Then, 3 weeks later, you called me from the parking lot. Why didn't you tell me she'd come to you? Because she asked me not to. And because, he stopped. Because I thought if I told you, it would become about me being in the middle of it. And I didn't want to be in the middle of it. I wanted her to tell you herself. He was quiet for a moment. I was wrong. I should have told you. Yeah, I said. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know you are. We talked for a while after that. Not about Sandra, just talked. The way we'd been talking since graduate school. The way good friendships sustain themselves through the things they say about everything except the hardest thing. Before we hung up, Tom said, for what it's worth, she loves you. The real version of her, not the version her mother built, loves you. I saw it when she was crying in my car. It's worth something, I said. It's not enough, but it's worth something. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. About the version of Sandra who had sat in Tom's car in October and asked whether she'd been defending the wrong choice for 8 years. About the specific terror of that question, not whether you love someone, but whether you have built your life on a mistake you have been too proud to name. I understood that terror, actually. I had spent 8 years trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't enough, and the effort of that proof had become its own kind of prison. I had shaped my self-worth around the verdict of a jury that was never going to change its verdict. I had confused persistence with evidence of love. The spring was long. Sandra came back to Columbus in April, to the apartment she'd rented on Fifth Avenue, close enough for the children to move easily between us. We went to mediation rather than full litigation. We had the same lawyer for an afternoon and agreed on the structure of the arrangement in 4 hours, which felt like either a testament to our fundamental compatibility or a sign that we'd both already let go of the things that make divorce ugly. Noah asked me, the first Wednesday I had them, whether I was sad. Sometimes, I said. About what? About things changing. I thought about how to say it. Sometimes things change because they need to, even when it's sad. He thought about this with the particular concentration of a 6-year-old applying himself to a difficult problem. Is mommy sad too? I think so. Yes. Then you're both sad about the same thing, he said. So you could be sad together. I looked at him. That's what me and Grace do, he said. When we're both sad, we just do it in the same room. I thought about that for a long time after he went to sleep. Sandra called me in May. Not to negotiate, just to talk. She was in therapy, she said. Individual therapy with someone who had been helping her understand the difference between her mother's voice and her own. It was slow work. It was necessary work. I'm sorry, she said. I've said it before, but I want to say it again with the context I have now. I'm sorry I brought you into a marriage where the primary relationship was between me and my parents' expectations. You deserved better than being evaluated for 8 years by someone who was always going to find you wanting. Your mother was always going to find me wanting, I said. You were the variable. I know. She paused. For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth the same as it would have been 5 years ago, the version of you I actually know is not the version in those emails. The version I know has been in every school meeting and every bedtime and every Wednesday pickup. That version is, she stopped. That version is what I had. And I chose my mother's version instead. Yeah, I said. I'm not asking for anything. I know you're not. She asked to come by in June to pick up some boxes. I had them ready. She came on a Saturday morning, and we worked together for 2 hours moving things to her car. And at one point Grace climbed into a box and refused to come out until Sandra and I were both laughing. And for a moment the kitchen looked exactly like what it had been. A place where 2 people had built something real and ordinary and genuinely good. Then the box was empty and the car was full and Sandra stood at the door with the specific expression of someone finishing a sentence that has been going on for a long time. Take care of yourself, she said. You too. She drove away. I stood on the porch until the car turned at the end of the block. Then I went inside and started making lunch. Because it was Saturday and Noah was in the backyard and Grace was drawing at the kitchen table and the ordinary life of a father continued exactly as it should. Gerald called me once, in July. I missed the call and didn't return it. He left no message. I think he understood. I still teach at Westridge. I still drive a Honda, newer now, but the same principle. I still grade papers on the French Revolution and write margin notes about people who built elaborate structures around the wrong ideas and then couldn't survive the collapse when reality arrived. I understand those people better than I used to. What I know now, that I didn't know when I sat at this table with French Revolution papers and Sandra's open laptop, is that the question was never whether I was enough for Gerald and Evelyn Pruitt. It was whether I was enough for the version of Sandra that existed underneath their voice. The version that laughed at something I said about the French monarchy at a birthday party and didn't do any calculating at all. That version of her had loved me. I believe that without reservation. What she had never learned to do was protect that love from the voice that had been evaluating her choices since before she was old enough to make them. That's not a failure of love. It's a failure of differentiation. The specific psychological work of becoming yourself rather than remaining your parents' idea of you. Some people do it in their 20s. Some do it later. Some, I suspect, never quite manage it. Sandra is doing it now, at 41, in a therapist's office on 4th Street. I think she'll get there. I think the version of her that argued for me in year 1 is still in there somewhere. Older and less certain of itself, but not gone. It's just not my job to wait for her anymore. The day Noah told me that when 2 people are sad about the same thing, they should just be sad in the same room. I thought about that sentence for weeks. The simplicity of it. The absence of strategy. 2 children with a problem deciding that the solution is proximity rather than separation. I'm not 6 years old. I know it isn't that simple. I know that proximity to the wrong version of something isn't comfort. It's just extended grief. I know the difference now between keeping the peace and having it. But I keep that sentence somewhere, the way you keep a photograph of something that was true before it got complicated. A record of the simplest version of the thing. Some days the simplest version is the truest one. Sandra Pruitt did not marry the wrong man. She married a man her parents had decided was wrong, and she spent 8 years building that decision inside herself like a structure that would justify an exit she wasn't sure she wanted to take. The distinction matters. The first is a tragedy of incompatibility. The second is a tragedy of architecture, of choosing again and again to trust an external evaluation over an internal one until the internal one atrophied from disuse. What the story ultimately reveals is the specific damage of never fully individuating from the people who formed you. Evelyn and Gerald Pruitt are not villains. They are parents who had a picture of their daughter's life and found the reality of it insufficient, and they communicated that insufficiency with the particular skill of people who believe they are helping. The damage they did was not intentional, but intention is irrelevant to structural consequence. A beam placed wrong will eventually fail regardless of the architect's sincerity. Marcus's flaw, the need for external validation, the identity built on proving himself worthy, is the precise mirror image of Sandra's flaw. He married someone whose parents didn't accept him and spent 8 years trying to change their assessment through demonstrated competence. She spent 8 years gradually adopting that assessment while maintaining the performance of a wife who had made peace with her choice. Two people, moving toward the same conclusion from opposite directions, with no honest conversation between them about where they were going. The twist the story delivers, Tom's revelation, Sandra's October visit to his car, reframes everything that came before it. Sandra was not simply passive recipient of her parents' campaign. She was actively seeking confirmation of her doubts from multiple sources, building the case from the inside out. This is more troubling than the simpler version, but it is also more human. We do not become our parents' voices without participation. We allow it because the alternative, becoming fully ourselves, with all the responsibility that entails, is frightening. Sandra's question to Tom, "What if my mother was right and I've been defending the wrong choice for 8 years?" is the most honest thing she says in the entire story. It contains the real terror. Not that Marcus was inadequate, but that she had been choosing her parents' version of inadequacy over her own experience of him, because the alternative required admitting that her doubts were hers, not theirs. Marcus chose to close the door not from bitterness, but from clarity. He had spent 8 years as a character in someone else's evaluation of his life. The discovery of the emails did not destroy his love for Sandra. It destroyed his ability to unsee the architecture. And once you see it, you cannot rebuild inside it. What hurts most about this story is not the spreadsheet, though the spreadsheet is its own particular kind of devastation. What hurts most is year one. The emails where Sandra argued for Marcus with specific warmth, where she knew exactly what she had and why it mattered, where her voice was fully hers. And then the gradual erosion of that voice, not through cruelty or neglect, but through the patient, quiet work of a mother who asked the right questions in the wrong direction. We talk about toxic relationships as though the toxin always comes from a partner. Sometimes it comes from the family you carry into the marriage with you. Sometimes the most damaging voice in a relationship is one that never sits at the dinner table, that operates only through phone calls and emails, and the long invisible influence of a parent who believes they are protecting their child from a mistake. The question I keep returning to is this: how many marriages are conducting a parallel trial in someone's inbox? How many of us are sending one version of our life to the people we love and a different version to the people we need to impress? And at what point does the version we perform become the version we believe? Sandra will find her own voice. I believe that. I think Noah's instinct was right. In the way children's instincts often are, that sadness shared in the same room is lighter than sadness carried separately. Marcus and Sandra will co-parent. They will be in the same room, sometimes, for school plays and birthday parties and the ordinary choreography of shared children. They will not be what they were, but they will be honest, finally, in the room together. That is something. After everything, that is not nothing.